Hey guys, Buildzoid here. You know what's a great way to make sure you never get sent motherboard review samples? Talking trash about motherboards. So this right here is the first Z370 motherboard on AHOC, and it's made by Strix. This is the Strix Z370-G gaming Wi-Fi motherboard. And so, for those of you unaware of what Strix is watered down ROG. Except like, and most of the time that's fine. Except right here we have a Strix like watered down ROG board that includes, in my opinion, far too much water and not enough, like Maximus DNA or really any ROG. Like the old red ROG boards, this has very, very far to have a relationship with those. So yeah, this thing is watered down ROG with an extremely high amount of water content. Let's get right into why that is, okay? Starting with the VRM here. This for people not aware of how phases work, or people who learned how to count phases with MSI, this looks like an 8-phase. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Great. And if you went to the MSI school of counting phases, you'd be right. And then you'd go +1, 2, because that there is, we can see that that's different from the rest of it here. Well, you can't actually tell from this side, but just keep up anyway. So that there's your iGPU VRM. That's all very nice and good. And then this block right here is your V-core. And the V-core is so totally an 8-phase that MSI would be proud of it. Though, honestly, every motherboard manufacturer does this. Gigabyte does this, MSI does this, ASRock does this, everybody does this. So, it's not just MSI. I'm ripping on MSI for no reason here. Though, actually, no, not really no reason. MSI takes this counting system to, like, the extreme end. Like, they'll do, like, a 20-phase doing this, but still, whereas the others at like past around 8 phases, they start actually using doubling, like real phases and doubling schemes. But MSI is just like, doubling schemes, the hell is that? Let's just keep going. Just keep adding more inductors. It looks like there's more phases. So what is the actual situation here? Well, you see this chip right here it's a rebrand, so I don't know specifically what it is, and I don't have a data sheet for it, but that's an ASP 1400. This thing has never, ever driven a real 8-phase. Ever. In the history of ASUS motherboards, this thing's only ever been used for 4-phase VRM designs, and there's no doublers on this thing. There's also only 4 drivers. You have a driver here, a driver there, a driver here, and a driver there. And that means we have a few too many inductors and way too many MOSFETs and not enough actual PWM signals. So basically, this, like, if MSI School of Phase, Motherboard Manufacturer Marketing Department School of Counting Phases, if this was this is a phase that turns on at the same time as that. So it's not out of phase. It doesn't deserve to be called a phase. What's going on here is you have 2 high side FETs, so you have, like this. This will turn on all together. So you'll have 2 high sides, 2 low sides, and this whole block turns on together. And that makes it not a, 8-phase. That makes it a 4. A big 4, but not a 8. So, yeah. But it gets worse. Could you believe it? These MOSFETs, they're not great. These are Vishay. So Vishay is a name brand, okay? But just because you're a name brand doesn't mean you can't make low-end budget parts. These are Vishay Syrah series FETs. And these, well, the low side is a SIRA Syrah 12s. And the high side are Syrah 14s. And let's just put it this way. This has 4.3 milliohms of RDS on. Okay? Good low side MOSFETs start under 3. Okay? 3 and lower. And with like more phases, damn it. Okay? So that like this is not good. Like if you compare this to like an ROG board will have low side FETs that have like 2 milliohms RDS on each, and you actually have 8 phases worth of them. Not this. This is like half. This is half the VR. Like this is kinda. You could kinda consider this half of a ROG Maximus 10 Apex VRM or Maximus 9 Apex, or really like a lot of other high-end boards with 8-phase VRMs. This is like half of that, because these MOSFETs, like the low side, ridiculously high RDS on. The high sides are actually not that bad. The RDS on isn't that high. It's not 4.3 milliohms. It's 5, which is actually like, that's really low by high side standards. The problem is the high side isn't exactly super fast, but it's not exactly well, the high side's actually not a letdown here. The high side's fine. The big problem here is these low side FETs. They're awful. They're absolutely awful. So, like, seriously, 4.3 milliohms of RDS on? You got to be freaking kidding me, ASUS. I'm just gonna, yeah, it really is 4.3. Like, here's the bloody data sheet, right? This is like, you don't, what? Why is this a low side? Like, this is so completely inadequate for a low side MOSFET on something that tries to call itself an ROG motherboard. Well, admittedly, it's like, you don't actually see ROG anywhere on this, and there's a reason for that. It would seriously hurt. Like, you know, you just have Strix on here. There's no ROG anywhere, but, well, there is that. That belongs to ROG, so that's not great, but there's a good reason why there's no explicit Republic of Gamers on this, and that's because, this looks really bad under that name, because this is awful. Anyway, the end result is that I would not trust this to, like, I would not try to do 5 gigahertz, like, I would not try to max out an 8700K on this, because this VRM will produce a lot of heat. Even if we go with, like, basically, what I ended up doing, because of how garbage these FETs are, you know, and to try give this motherboard every chance of not just being completely trashed, well, let's go through the power figures, right? So an 8700K, the V-Core, you're going to be looking at, say, 1.42 volts. You're going to be looking at 140 amps of current. Yes, that is a lot of power consumption. Surprise, surprise, if you increase core count by 50%, power consumption goes up by 50%. I know, it's incredible how that works. So basically, 8700Ks are power hogs compared to KB, well, literally 50% more power hungry than KB Lakes, because they haven't really improved much. So if you shove 1.42 volts into one of these, you get 140 amps current draw, which is almost 200 watts total CPU core power consumption. And that translates into this VRM producing 22 watts of heat, and that's assuming 10 volt gate drive and 150 kilohertz switching frequency. I am assuming that these inductors here are going to be very, very high inductance. They're going to be like probably, I mean, ASUS has had motherboards which had like 680 nanohenry inductors. And basically why this is important is the higher your inductance, the slower you can switch the current through the inductor to get like reasonable VRM output ripple. And you know, low switching frequency translates into less switching loss on the low side, on the high side. And I know I said the low side is the problem, but here it's just like, well, any power you can save is good, because this VRM otherwise just gets stupid hot. If I calculated this at, like, when I was doing the calculations at 300 kilohertz, we were approaching 27 watts for this one, which, I mean, there's not a big difference to that 22, but, like, you know, this is really, really bad. This is just bad. And also, I know for a fact that, like, other motherboards that I've dealt with that use this controller do actually ship at 150 kilohertz out of the box. So there's a pretty good chance that's actually what it runs at out of the box. in which case, it's not quite as terrible as it could be. Now, for 1.3 volts output, your current consumption doesn't actually change that much. It only drops to 125 amps, so this VRM goes from very hot to still pretty damn hot at 18 watts of heat output. So basically, I would not recommend trying to run, well, if you have this motherboard and you don't plan to have any VRM airflow, don't put an 8700K in it, because your 8700K is going to cook the VRM if you try to overclock. Because yeah, this is like, these low side MOSFETs are awful. Like, they're absolutely awful. And like, they literally should just have half the RDS on that they're shipping with. Like, there's no real other fix I can think of. So yeah, this is just blech. So I wouldn't put an 8700K, because if you put an 8700K in this and you try to run it at 5 gigahertz and you don't actively do something about the VRM cooling situation, this will almost certainly overheat, and you're going to have a bad day. I'm pretty sure, though, that ASUS does have actual temperature sensors in this VRM, so it will shut down before it catches fire. But if you keep hammering the VRM for, ages, so like, you run this VRM into the ground for like a year or two, like, you do rendering and video recording and like video editing, heavy CPU heavy workloads a lot, or you do rendering, and you just run this VRM into the ground with an overclock where it's running at 100 plus degrees centigrade, because I'm pretty sure the thermal shutdown is going to be set at 125. Because if they set it any lower, it would be shutting down a lot, considering how much heat this puts out. Well, these capacitors all around the board, first of all, they're not Nichicons, even though they are black. I have no idea who makes these, but because the writing, like, they're some kind of MIL series, which I really hope that's not marketing going with like milli. And I probably, marketing probably decided for that, because yeah, but I hope that's not the logic there. Either way, regardless of the letters on there, there's also 5K in the in one of the part of the inscription on these includes 5K. So I'm going to assume that these are 5,000 hours at 105 degrees centigrade, which is not great if this VRM, if you run this board hard for a long time. Like, that is, these caps are going to die in like a year. Well, depending on how many hours at 100% load you run, but obviously the board's lifespan is limited, because this VRM is going to run hot, and these caps aren't rated for, like, you can get 10K or 12K, and you can also get just higher temperature ratings as well, but those get very, very expensive very, very quick. So 10K 105C is relatively affordable, but even that is just kind of ridiculous. So yeah, I am really not impressed with this. I would not run an 8700K on it. You're going to have a pretty bad time. Now, an 8600K pulls significantly less power, because the way, like, hyperthreading in, which, like, these power draw figures are for AVX workloads. Wait, did I seriously just tack on killer? Yeah, I did. It's late at night. Anyway, for an 8600K, the current draw is actually significantly lower, because hyperthreading does, like, it gives you a roughly 30% increase, 30 to 40% increase in performance, and it also increases your power consumption by roughly 30 to 40%. And I know that from testing on Kaby Lake CPUs, because I've still not had an 8700K in my hands, or an 8600K. So, my data is extrapolated here from the 8700K data I have from Gamers Nexus, but an 8600K should pull quite a bit less current. So you'll be looking at about 100 amps at 1.42 volts. And at that point, it'll still be pretty toasty, but the heatsink, the VRM heatsink should be able to deal with that on its own without too much assistance. Obviously, if you put this board into the most cramped case ever and just don't do anything for VRM cooling, this is still going to suck. But as long as you have some kind of airflow, it should be fine at this kind of current throughput. And if you drop down to 1.3 volts, you're going to be looking at about 90 amps and about 10 watts of heat output. So, that's a mild improvement. Now, an i3 8350K, you can just absolutely go to town on that CPU. No worries there. This thing doesn't pull anything because, it's like you take off 2 cores and suddenly your power consumption is just it drops a lot. 33% decrease in power draw. And also, the 8350K is basically like an i5 7600K, which is kind of like a 7700K without hyperthreading. And I've tested hyperthreading and off on a 7700K. I actually know how that behaves. So an 8350K is going to be fine because 1.42 volts, you're going to be looking at 70 amps, and that's going to only produce about 7 watts of heat. So this board is great for running i3s on. Oh man. And if you're, honestly, if you have an i3 8350K, just run it at 1.42 volts. I mean, if you drop down, you're going to go to 60 amps instead of 70, which, mild improvement in 1.3. But yeah, the VRM will have no problem with that. So basically, I would recommend this motherboard for maxing out a 8600K at most in airflow limited scenarios. And if you actually care about, if you actually do something about your VRM cooling, it should probably handle this. I'm still not sure I would try to run 1.42 volts on it. Because, these low side FETs are just kind of awful. And an 8700Ks are legitimately really damn power hungry. So, yeah, I mean, we've not really seen a big improvement in power. For a given voltage, we've not seen an improvement in power efficiency. Intel's just been making the operating voltage of their 14 nanometer process for a given frequency steadily lower. But if you overclock and you max the voltage, your power draw is still going to suck as much as it did, for Skylake or, Broadwell didn't clock that high, so the frequency kind of limited the power consumption. But high frequency, high voltage, huge power draw, especially at high core counts, which 8700K isn't admittedly that high core count, but it's a lot, 6 cores is a lot of cores. So, yeah, this stuff runs hot, unfortunately. And this board, is, if you're on an 8700K, this might run into some serious issues. Now then, let's move on to the minor rails, VCCIO and VCCSA. These you don't have to worry about because they're minor rails, luckily. So I'm not sure which one's which, but I'm gonna say that this is probably VCCIO on the basis that it uses a fully integrated buck converter from Texas Instruments. So that's a TI TPS. That's the part number itself there. That's where is it? TPS 51362. Just was looking at my notes. And VCCIO has to, according to Intel spec, max out around 5.5 amps, at which point this chip is going to produce about 0.8 watts of heat. So that's no problem. You don't have to worry about your VCCIO. VCCSA, on the other hand, uses 2 discrete MOSFETs. It uses 2 of the Seraph 14s, but luckily, so even higher low side RDS on now. But the thing about VCCSA is it's according to Intel spec, it maxes out around 11 amps. So 1.2 volts, 11 amps at 300 kilohertz switching frequency, because it is a single phase. So you can't really get away with super low switching frequency on those. At least not if you want to maintain good ripple current out on the output. Well, ripple voltage on the output. So 1.2 volts, 11 amps, you'd be looking at about 1.7 watts of heat, which again is fine because it's spread across a, pretty, there's a lot of surface area here for these 2 MOSFETs to cool themselves. So these guys will be fine. That'll be fine. This is probably VPP, and I don't know what that is. Can't ID it. Or this down here could be VPP. That might also be chipset power, though. So, yeah, it would be nice to have the board in hand, but unfortunately, at the very least, we have all the important stuff covered. The memory power is right over here. There's also some debug LEDs, not a real postcode because, again, this is so watered down that postcodes are apparently too expensive to include. And the memory power, I mean, DDR4 is really power efficient, so you're looking at like max 2 watts per stick. So even if you had 4 sticks in here, you're going to be looking at 8 watts total. And that's even with like high VDIM. So, you know, at most, this is going to have to push like 6 amps at like 1.35 volts. And, well, that's only going to produce, and that's a 300 kilohertz switching frequency. And the FETs used are, well, it's you have a high and 2 lows. And it's, again, more of these guys. And the end result is that only produces about 0.6 watts of heat. So that's completely fine. But then, you know, DDR4 power rail is always completely fine. Like, I've never seen a motherboard where it's a problem. So, yeah, that there is non-issue. There's your basic debug LEDs. What else is there on this motherboard that's interesting? Not much. Yeah. Well, this is why they started the Strix brand, so they could sell you stuff that looks like ROG and sounds like ROG, but isn't ROG. Well, isn't ROG. And, yeah, ew. Like, this is really disappointing in my book, like, in my opinion. Like, because, yeah, it just is, you know. This is a motherboard that rides basically off of the reputation of ASUS's premium brand and is utter trash, as far as I'm concerned. Like, this V-Core VRM has no business powering an 8700K if you're trying to max one of them out. It's gonna run stupid hot. And it's gonna need airflow. And these heat sinks, like, they're, you know, modern art pieces, not heat sinks. So, yeah, this is really, really disappointing. Now I really hope nobody ever sends this to ASUS, because I do actually like other ASUS motherboards, just not this one. But yeah, this is just... And you know what sucks about this? I was actually considering testing one of these because I was kind of hoping it would be like a... You know, I wasn't expecting like a full-on successor to the old Maximus Gene boards, because the Gene boards literally took the same VRM that you would find on like a Formula or an Extreme, and they just put it on an MATX motherboard. So those were really, really solid. But this is not even close to that. This is like they took one of the Prime series motherboards and painted it black and slapped Strix on it and gaming to help it sell. And it probably works. But yeah, this is so disappointing. And I just hate how all of these computer like, is awful. Like, all of these manufacturers just, they make a brand, right? They make it really, really solid, and at some point they snap and water it down to this. You know, all of them do this. I mean, yeah, so this is just like this V-Core VRM. I mean, it speaks for itself. It's just it needs a, like, if they at least put like a massive VRM heatsink on it, then, you know, you could get away with at least like, oh, but you can at least cool it. But as it stands, I think this thing's going to have massive, like, this thing should have major issues trying to run an 8700K, because 8700Ks run really power hungry if you max them out. And, well, this VRM is not built for, you know, well, is not capable of handling that. So at this point, I think I've rambled on far too long, but and made my disappointment abundantly clear, I think, because yeah, this is just awful, like, really awful. I mean, I wouldn't, like, yeah. Anyway, That's it for the video. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe if you would like to make sure that I can actually review stuff. Because, well, I think this video speaks for itself. You can probably guess how I'm never going to see an ASUS motherboard from now on. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon, I have a PayPal, there's shirts you can buy. That would, that will, like, all of that massively helps out with running the channel, so that in the future I might be able to, well, so that going forward, I can buy stuff instead of trying to beg brands into sending me stuff, because, well, they probably don't want me to say this kind of stuff, do they? So, yeah, that's not great. Like, I'm gonna be a YouTube influencer. Oh, that's not working, is it? Anyway, it would be really, really great if you, did the Patreon thing or PayPal or the shirts. And, see you guys, next time. Oh, and thanks to the guy who sent this photo in, because, this kind of disappointment has to be, revealed, I guess. Incidentally, he was complaining about his 8700K's overclock crashing. Well, I think this clears up why that might be, doesn't it? And for real this time, goodbye. Where's the stop button? Oh, there it is.